Well, when I was a little girl, I used to go with my dad, and we would walk from where I was raised in Johnstown, and we would walk into town. The neighbors were friendly, and a lot of people were nice. You got along the way, and you'd speak to people, and they would speak to you. As I got older, I remember going with my dad again to the Majestic Theater in downtown Johnstown. It's no longer there. It's a part of where the Lee Hospital is located now. And they had movies and stage shows. In our neighborhood, I remember playing with some of the children, and we had a young man who became the marble champion of the United States, and his name was Earl Layton. And we used to play hopscotch and different kind of games. I want to share this with you. On Saturday afternoons, there was a gas station not too far from where where I lived, and they had, as they called it in those days, a pop machine. And we used to go over and get a Clark bar for a nickel and a bottle of Pepsi, and then we would go on the front porch of my girlfriend's house, and we would have paper dolls, and we would play paper dolls every Saturday afternoon, and we'd dress these paper dolls up, and we had them going various places, and it was just a lot of fun. In high school, I had friends who were musicians, and they used to have called a jam session, and they held it downtown on Main Street. It was a Democratic club at the time, and we used to go down there. My girlfriends and I, we would go down and listen to and then we would dance, and and I used to love to go dancing. And when I was in high school, I got to go to a lot of dances. So the 1936 flood, we lived in Johnstown, where I was raised. We lived fairly close to the river. At that time, my father was working up in Evansburg, and the river kept getting higher and higher, and we lived in a first-floor apartment, and our neighbors came and they helped us, and we moved furniture up into the second-floor apartment. And I had gotten a desk for Christmas that year, and I was very upset about that desk, and between us, we managed to get that desk upstairs, and to this day, it's still good. But I took books, and my two uncles, my mother's brothers, they lived up in Walnut Grove, which was a section of Johnstown, and they came down and they carried my mother and I out, and at that time the water was waist deep. And my father came down from Evansburg. He heard about the flood, and he could see where we lived, everything was flooded, and he had no idea where we were. And of course, those days there were no cell phones or anything. And one of the neighbors who had come up to the hill there said that they thought that my mother and I were being carried out. So then my father realized that we went up to my grandmother's, and she lived in Walnut Grove at the time. And of course we were safe, but we got surplus food through the government. The people that had all the problems, we got cheese and some meat and everything. We stayed with my grandmother, but when we went back down to the apartment, we had a piano, and it had gone up against the door, so we had trouble getting into the apartment, and we lost just about everything other than what we were able to carry upstairs. So at least we didn't lose any of the people in our family, which in itself was a blessing, but it certainly did an awful lot of damage. And right after that flood, the government made provisions for them to come in and establish the flood projects. But again, I have to truly say that the people in Johnstown pulled together. and we resurrected ourselves again. At one time, Johnstown had a beautiful downtown, and they had many, many stores. They had a penny store, and across from that, on Main Street, the upper Main Street was a men's store, Wolf and Reynolds, and going up toward Bedford Street, there was Swank's department store, and of course that stayed for many years. And later, when they did tear it down, they had an awful lot of trouble tearing it down because I don't think they realized how strongly that store was built. And the City Park, of course, was there, and the Cambria Theater, the State Theater, and as I mentioned before, the Majestic Theater. We had women's stores, Mark's, which exclusively sold women's clothes, a jewelry shop. They had a shop where they sold women's fur coats, women's hats, because in those days women really wore hats. I mean, you mostly wore a hat to go to church, but if you were going out for the evening, you would wear a hat. And then, of course, the hospital was down there. Of course, the Gloucester Brothers store, which was rather large, and they carried quite a bit of merchandise. In the lower level, they had a grocery down there, and they had a counter where they sold cheese, and it was very nice because you could go there. They had various kinds, and you could go there and get maybe a pound of cheese or 5 pound, whatever you chose. And then on the upper floors, they had purses, and they also had a makeup department and a men's store. And then, of course, you had the Penn Traffic store, which many people went to, but their prices were a little bit higher. And they had a bakery in there, but a lot of people from the Westmont section and that, they would call and order and have their groceries delivered.